Witches, shrouded in shadow and enigma, have long been symbols of fear and uncertainty. They are said to wield the arcane arts, magic, a force both strange and forbidden. Legends claim they can summon storms with a mere gesture, topple kingdoms in a single night, and drown entire villages beneath torrents of rain. It's no wonder they are feared by all. Kingdoms, desperate to rid themselves of such power, often gather entire armies of mercenaries to hunt them down. On this particular occasion, one kingdom had assembled a vast force of mercenaries, all for the purpose of hunting a single which rumored to be hiding in the nearby forests. Among the throng was a young man, skeptical that such a large group was truly necessary for the task. Surely, he thought, one which couldn't be so dangerous. As he pushed his way through the crowd, he suddenly stumbled into a massive figure, a giant of a man with broad shoulders and a towering frame. The man's face was marked with a deep scar running from his left cheek to his forehead, and he carried a pair of wickedly sharp blades in his hands. The young man froze, staring up in awe at the intimidating figure. Only when one of his companions nudged him, informing him excitedly, did he learn who the man was. None other than the infamous dual-bladed mercenary, a legend among fighters. The giant merely shrugged off the attention and turned to face the young man and seized the opportunity to ask what he knew about witches. He confessed that he had never encountered one himself and was desperate for any information. "All I know are the rumors. Witches who conjure fire from thin air, who summon fierce winds without a single tool." "Is it true?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of doubt. The only sources he had were from fairy tales, hardly reliable intel, and he needed a real plan. The black-haired mercenary burst into laughter. He shook his head, dismissing the legends with a wave of his hand. "Magic? Witches conjuring storms and fire? It's all nonsense," he declared, smirking. "Probably just some old woman someone decided to call a witch. A fraud, nothing more." Our protagonist wasn't convinced. If the danger was so trivial, why had the kingdom gathered such a massive force? His eyes scanned the crowd of hardened mercenaries, each armed to the teeth and clearly ready for battle. The unease settled heavier in his chest. If it were really that simple, he thought, why summon an army for just one witch? There was something they weren't telling him, something that still lurked in the shadows, just out of reach. The fact that several squads had been sent after this witch in the past, only to fail, made him even more determined not to underestimate her. Unlike his companions, who dismissed the rumors as nothing more than fanciful tales and hoaxes, he took them seriously, believing there was more truth to the legends than others cared to admit. Upon reaching the target location, the squadron commander raised his hand, signaling the group to halt. Confusion flickered across the faces of the soldiers. They had expected a fortress or a hideout, but they stood in front of a humble, weather-beaten mud house. The second in command, puzzled, inquired if civilians might be present, but the commander dismissed the notion with a sharp shake of his head. The reports had mentioned no such thing. With a brisk wave, the commander ordered the first squadron to perform an interior sweep of the house, while the rest were to secure the perimeter. His words were barely out when a young woman, draped in a black cloak, appeared at the doorway. Her presence was eerie, silent and sudden, like she had materialized out of thin air. The commander barked a command, demanding her identity and an explanation for her presence in such a desolate place. But as he spoke, our protagonist's instincts flared. An electric jolt of unease shot up his spine. Something about the woman was off, and he knew deep down that this was no ordinary encounter. The commander gave the order, his voice tense. "Archer, if she moves, fire a warning shot by her feet." The archer nodded, drawing her bow and taking aim. But before anyone could react, the young woman raised her hand, her lips moving in a low, sinister chant. Suddenly, a cold, oppressive energy seemed to pulse from the ground beneath them. Sensing danger, our protagonist moved instinctively. He leaped onto a chariot horse, and in a swift, desperate motion, vaulted off its back and into the branches of a nearby tree. In the blink of an eye, jagged spikes of earth erupted from the soil with terrifying speed, impaling the soldiers in a blur of motion. The deadly spikes moved as fast as sound, cutting down men where they stood. Shock and disbelief washed over the survivors. The soldiers, who had once mocked the stories of the witch, now understood the terrifying truth. The rumors were real, and the girl standing before them was indeed the witch they had been hunting. Panic set in as chaos erupted. The battleground became a scene of fear and confusion. Soldiers, realizing they were hopelessly outmatched, scattered in every direction, desperate to escape the nightmare that had unfolded before their eyes. Watching the chaos, our protagonist hesitated, torn between retreat and the instinct to fight. He replayed the scene in his mind, how he avoided her attack. He knew this wasn't the time to run blindly. He didn't yet understand the full range of her power, and retreating could mean falling right into her trap. Steeling himself, he made his decision. The only way forward was to confront her head-on. Half of the troops were wiped out in the blink of an eye. The battlefield was suddenly silent, and the remaining soldiers stared in disbelief as the witch stood unfazed, a dark figure amidst the chaos. With grim determination, the commander raised his voice, cutting through the stunned silence. "Archers, open fire." The order was swift, and the soldiers, desperate to regain their footing, obeyed without hesitation. In a matter of moments, the sky was blackened with a hail of arrows, each one hurtling toward the silent, unflinching figure of the witch. But she did not waver. Stepping forward, the witch raised her hand, and the ground seemed to answer her call. An earthen barrier erupted from the soil, absorbing the arrows as if they were nothing more than raindrops. With a practiced ease, she molded a lump of clay at her feet, shaping it into a colossal golem that loomed above the battlefield like a creature from a nightmare. Fear seized the hearts of the soldiers. Terror was plain on their faces. Among them, the young mercenary, who had dismissed the warnings as mere superstition and exaggeration, now stood frozen as he grasped the true scale of the witch's power. His confidence shattered, he turned and fled without a second thought. His commander, understanding the futility of their mission, followed close behind. With a simple flick of her wrist, the witch commanded the golem to attack. It moved with terrible force, its giant arms swinging in a wide arc that obliterated the front line in a single, devastating blow. The young mercenary, still fleeing, glanced over his shoulder just in time to see his comrades and his commander meet a brutal end. The witch watched the scene unfold with a detached yawn, her expression devoid of emotion or regret. On the ground, the commander lay dying, his breath ragged and shallow. He understood in those final moments that they had never stood a chance. This had all been a fool's crusade, doomed from the start. With a heavy, rattling breath, he died, realizing how pointless it all had been. But as the others fled, our protagonist remained. He moved forward, undaunted by the destruction around him, his eyes fixed on the witch with the cold, unyielding gaze of a hunter. The young mercenary, fleeing the battlefield, caught sight of him charging toward the danger he was so desperate to escape. In a blur of motion, the protagonist leapt onto the back of the massive golem, using its sheer size as a springboard to launch himself directly at the witch. She looked up, surprised and amused, as if she had found a new toy to play with. He swung his weapon with all his might, and though his strike cracked the earth barrier she had raised, it was not enough to shatter it. A familiar chill washed over him, the same cold and oppressive energy that had signaled the spikes before. He retreated just in time, narrowly avoiding the jagged spears of stone that shot from the ground beneath his feet. Determination burned in his eyes as he faced the witch, knowing that the real fight had only just begun. Without giving the witch a moment to react, he moved with explosive speed, far beyond the limits of ordinary human ability. Her eyes widened in shock. She hadn't anticipated such power. In a heartbeat, the mercenary was upon her, blade poised to strike. Amusement vanished from her face, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. Desperately, she summoned an earthen barrier, but it wasn't enough. His blade cleaved through it as if it were nothing more than paper, missing her head by a fraction of an inch. For a brief, electric second, their eyes locked. Hers wide with confusion and terror, his cold and unyielding, fixed with a predator's determination. He saw the truth in that moment. She was vulnerable in close combat. Realizing his advantage, he pressed forward, keeping their encounter close and relentless. His sword came down in a powerful vertical slash, shattering a second barrier she raised in a frantic attempt to block. The witch retaliated by summoning a volley of jagged earth spikes. But the mercenary was ready. He dodged backward, avoiding the deadly assault. She fired off more attacks, desperate to widen the gap between them, knowing that at close range she wouldn't survive. His initial surprise attack had failed, but now he was in his element. He settled into a battle stance, waiting for the right moment to strike, eyes keen and focused, searching for any weakness in her frantic defense. Sensing the urgency, the witch began to prepare her most powerful attack, drawing on the raw magic that pulsed beneath the ground. The air grew thick with a sinister energy. The mercenary's face hardened. He knew this was it. If he didn't act now, he would be overwhelmed. Beneath his feet, the ground began to shift and tremble, rising and bulging with the energy she was summoning. Hundreds of bumps formed, each threatening to become a deadly spike. For any ordinary person, avoiding them all would be impossible. But he wasn't ordinary. Pushing his limits, he surged forward, his speed magnified tenfold. The earth spikes shot upward in a deadly storm, but he moved like a blur, dodging each one with precision. Suddenly, a spike snagged his cape, halting his momentum just enough for another to narrowly miss his head. He froze for a split second amidst a battlefield of deadly earth and silence, his breath ragged, while the witch's panting filled the air, her eyes wide with raw fear. She was trembling, haunted by the realization that she had come closer to death than ever before. Her hand shook violently, memories of past battles flooding back, a silent reminder of her mortality. She clenched her trembling hand, forcing it to still, and turned to leave, hoping to make her escape. But before she could take a second step, a deafening explosion shattered the silence. A blast of raw power erupted from the field of spikes. Through the cloud of debris and dust, the mercenary emerged, charging forward with monstrous speed. His eyes were locked on her, burning with a relentless drive. In that moment, he was no longer just a hunter. He was a force of nature, barreling through the storm she had unleashed, unstoppable and fierce, aiming to end this battle once and for all. With a flash of precision and power, the mercenary shattered the witch's earthen barrier in a single, decisive strike. She hastily raised a second, but it was obliterated by another mighty swing, the impact sending her hurtling backward. She rolled across the ground like a tossed coin, coming to a stop several meters away. Dazed and breathless, she struggled to her feet, but before she could steady herself, his blade was already inches from her face. Eyes wide with shock, she stammered an admission, confessing that she had believed him dead after her last attack. His cold, steady gaze didn't waver as he asked the question that had weighed on him throughout the battle. "Why are you killing people?" Her expression shifted, growing serious, almost contemplative. "What a pointless question," she replied, her voice edged with weariness. She explained that the soldiers had come to kill her, leaving her no choice but to defend herself. Life and death, to her, were meaningless concepts. Whether people lived or died was of no concern. It was survival that mattered. "Are you satisfied with that answer?" she asked, her tone sharp and detached. He nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. She continued, her voice quiet now, almost resigned. "I'm the victim in all of this, but none of it matters anymore. You can kill me. I have no will to fight left." Her words gave him pause. He saw in her a reflection of his own existence, the expendable nature of life, whether that of a witch or a mercenary. He thought of the countless battles he had fought, lives lost on both sides, all for the sake of survival. In their eyes, we're just tools meant to die, he thought bitterly. The parallel between them was undeniable. One killing to stay alive, the other killing for pay. Both had walked a path paved with sacrifice, haunted by the same grim reality. Breaking from his thoughts, he softened his gaze. "You and I are the same," he said quietly. She blinked, skeptical. "I'm a witch. You're a mercenary. How are we the same?" He took a moment before explaining his perspective, laying bare the stark similarities in their fates. Yet her skepticism remained. "Why haven't you killed me?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "Do you pity me?" Annoyance flashed across his face. He pointed to a fallen soldier, impaled on one of her earth spikes. "That man was my client," he said curtly. "A dead client doesn't pay a reward." She smirked, offering a sarcastic apology. "Then take my head to the domain lord," she suggested flatly, her tone drenched in bitter resignation. The mercenary shook his head, exasperated. "Imagine this," he said. "You send your precious son off to hunt a witch, complete with an army. Then the only person to return is a mercenary, a nobody from who knows where. What do you think happens then?" She raised an eyebrow, finally intrigued. "If you're lucky, the gallows. If not, torture, humiliation, and your head on display in the town square." "Exactly," he replied. Her expression hardened. "Are you really okay with that?" she asked, her voice quiet but pointed. He sighed. "No, I'm not willing to throw my life away." Turning, he began to walk away, adding bitterly, "The squad's wiped out. We failed the witch hunt." To his surprise, she stopped him, a small, amused smile tugging at her lips. "That's quite a way to admit defeat," she quipped, her tone light, almost teasing. Her sudden shift caught him off guard, leaving him deeply confused. Before he could respond, she spoke again, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability. "Protect me," she said simply. The words hit him like a thunderclap. He turned back to her, eyes wide, his mind reeling. Of all the things she could have said, this was the last he expected. She sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world rested upon them. "I want you to take me to a place where no one will ever bother me again." Her voice tinged with bitterness. "Everywhere I go, I'm hunted, like prey. No matter how far I run, no matter how many I drive away, they just keep coming. Like cockroaches." Her tone sharpened, frustration seeping into her words. "More and more of them, relentless and unending. And me? I've reached my limit." Her vulnerability hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Before she could continue, the mercenary interrupted, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "I don't care about your reasons." She blinked, startled, her wide eyes betraying her confusion. For a moment, she stared at him, as if searching for some hidden meaning in his words. Misinterpreting his indifference, she offered a soft, awkward apology. "I'm sorry," she muttered, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I guess I've just forgotten how to interact with people. It's been so long. I've been alone for so long." He remained silent, watching her with an unreadable expression. Then, breaking the quiet, he clarified, "I'm not concerned with your story. What I care about is whether you can pay me." Her eyes widened again, this time with a mix of surprise and relief. "Yes," she exclaimed quickly, her voice rising in urgency. "I can pay you." Fumbling through the folds of her tattered clothes, she pulled out a small, smooth stone that shimmered faintly in the light. Holding it out to him, she said with a confidence that seemed almost misplaced, "For now, I can pay you in advance with this." Her tone carried a curious blend of pride and desperation, as though she believed this gesture alone would seal the deal. The mercenary eyed the stone, its faint glow hinting at some value beyond its appearance. Yet his expression remained stoic, his thoughts unreadable. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with curious eyes. "So, what do you think of my offer?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with uncertainty. The mercenary hesitated, glancing down at the glowing stone in his hand. "Honestly," he admitted, "I have no idea. I'm a mercenary, not an appraiser. I couldn't tell you what this is worth even if I tried." She sighed, a sound of quiet understanding. "Fair enough," she replied. He looked at her thoughtfully and asked, "Do you know its value then? How much is it worth?" A rueful smile crept across her lips as she shook her head. "Not a clue," she said lightly. "I'm a witch, remember? I've never needed to know what things sell for in the human world." There was something almost endearing in her candor, a glimpse of innocence beneath the layers of bitterness and fatigue. Her smile lingered, warm and amicable, and for a moment Zig saw something unexpected, a normal girl, not the fearsome which he had fought mere moments ago. He couldn't help but smile back, the absurdity of the situation hitting him like a punchline to some cosmic joke. A hardened mercenary protecting a hunted witch? Life truly had a strange sense of humor. Snapping himself back to the gravity of the moment, he folded his arms and spoke with measured seriousness. "There's nowhere on this continent that's safe for a witch," he said plainly. Her smile faltered, and a shadow of sadness crossed her face. She nodded slowly, her silence speaking volumes. After a moment, Zig broke the heavy quiet. "We could cross to another continent," he suggested. Her eyes widened in shock, her breath catching as she processed his words. She stood frozen, lost in thought, her mind racing. Another continent? There's no guarantee I'd be safe there. What if it's even worse? What if it's more dangerous than here? The uncertainty swirled in her mind, but then another thought cut through the doubt like a blade. But is it any worse than living like this, shunned, hunted, always running? She looked back at him, her expression resolute. Breaking the silence, she said quietly, "Rather than being shunned by everyone and living on the run, it might be better to take my chances with the unknown." A mutual understanding passed between them. Without a word, Zig extended his hand toward her. "Zig. Zig Crane," he said, his voice firm but laced with a newfound sense of camaraderie. She hesitated, then clasped his hand in her own. Her grip was surprisingly steady. "Siasha," she said softly, her tone gentle yet sure. "Just Siasha." And so, their fates entwined. The mercenary and the witch set their sights on the horizon, embarking on a perilous journey to a distant continent. An untamed land of mystery and promise, where they dared to hope for refuge. A place where weary hearts might finally find peace.
If you're enjoying the story and can't wait to see what happens next, drop the word "witch" in the comment section below. Your feedback will help me bring you an even longer and more thrilling video next time. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next adventure.
Eh.